an LLC versus a C corporation, they are more or less the same. The biggest difference is going to be the tax treatment. And this interplays with both U.S. tax and foreign tax. A C corporation is a taxable entity. If the corporation earns profit, that profit is going to be taxed. What's left after that tax can be distributed up to the shareholders, and then they will pay tax on it again. So it's a double taxation. The LLC vehicle, which came into state by state, but over the last 10 or 15 years, all states have adopted it, is a pass-through entity for tax purposes, meaning that the LLC as a entity does not pay tax. The profit is sent straight up to the owners, and the owners pay tax at their level. So it's a single taxation, and in almost every jurisdiction that means you're going to pay less in tax. There are times, however, when you might want the C corporation because it's a little bit cheaper to set up, particularly for a small business, and many U.S. businesses that are set up by foreign companies are expected to lose money for a long period of time, so nobody cares about paying tax on profit because they don't expect that tax on profit. So that's, a little nuance to discuss, but most of the time for our clients we set up the LLC. Where to form the LLC? We have many different states in the United States. Each state has its own LLC law. If you form an LLC, you do it under state law. You register with the Secretary of State of that state. So which one do you choose? You can choose any state you want. There's no requirement that says you need Delaware or Nevada or New York or whatever. You can choose any one that you want. The considerations to think about are where's your base of operations going to be, and the quality of the corporate law in that state, and particularly the courts that sit in that state, because if there's a dispute, more likely than not, that's where you're going to fight it out. So you want a more developed area. Typically, we suggest either New York, Delaware, or sometimes Nevada. However, regardless of where you form the entity, you have to also consider where the business activities will take place. So if a company comes in and says, I'm going to have a headquarters in New York, but I want to be a Delaware LLC, we can do that. We'll form them in Delaware, but we need to authorize them to do business in New York. It's a separate filing. It doesn't make them a New York corporation, but it gives them the authority to do business in New York, which in essence gives them the authority to use the court system in New York if they have a dispute with someone. If they are not authorized to do business in New York, they cannot make use of the New York courts. What does it look like? This is a typical structure that we put together. The foreign company can sit anywhere. Foreign means foreign outside the United States, foreign in a different state, whatever. For this purposes, let's say foreign companies in Turkey. Typically, the Turkish company will own either 100% of the U.S. LLC, which makes it a single member LLC, or, this is often the case, the company in Turkey says, I'm going to hire some really great folks in the United States. They're going to sell our products like crazy and make us tons of money. I want to make sure they can be owners too. And maybe we also have a local partner that we're not going to create quite a joint venture, but I want to give them 10% of the company. So everybody feels like they're participating. So you can have foreign company owning 80, key employees owning 10, local partner owning 10. Now the beauty of an LLC is you can have different types of ownership. The foreign company can own 100% of the voting shares, called units in an LLC. And the key employees and the local partners can own 10% each of income shares. So when they distribute out the income, 80% goes to the foreign company, 10 to each of the employees and local partner. But when it comes to making decisions on how to run the business, the foreign company can have 100% of the vote. There's all kinds of complexities with that. The beauty of an LLC is it's a creature of contract. So you can contract with your fellow members and make any kind of arrangement you want. Think of it like a partnership. So there are many LLCs which have A units, B units, C units, whatever the mind can imagine. Okay? The companies are governed somewhat similarly and a little bit differently. C corporation has shareholders. They're the owners. Okay? Shareholders appoints a board of directors to act on their behalf. If you're representing a foreign company, you're going to ask your client who you want on the board. Typically, you want an odd number, so if there's a vote, you don't split it 50-50. That board can be non-U.S. citizens. It doesn't matter. You don't need to be a U.S. citizen to be on the board. The board appoints officers that act and do the day-to-day activity in the company. You need generally at least two, a president and a secretary, because your bank's going to want you to sign documents which require the secretary to authenticate the signature of the president. Beyond that, you don't need any other officers, but you may want to have others, treasurer, vice president, what have you. So the shareholders own the company, the board is the representative of the shareholders, and the officers operate the company at the pleasure of the board. LLC has two distinct ways to manage itself. The LLC, as I said before, doesn't have shareholders, they have members. So the members, the owners, can manage the business themselves. In the example I gave before, the foreign company has a 100% vote, they get to decide everything. Or, a foreign company can say, I'll appoint a board of managers. And that board maybe is going to have one representative from the employees, one representative from the local partner, three representatives from the foreign parent, and they will manage the company, and they may vote 50-50, they may vote a simple majority, 51-49, they may say 65-35, depending on what kinds of things they want to do. Frequently we are asked by clients, should I sit on the board? Should I manage the company? Am I going to get sued personally? Remember, that box protects the owner inside the box from liability. Generally, there's no personal liability for a board member or a managing member or even a member of an LLC, as long as they act within the scope of the corporate entity. Right? If they act outside of it, they do wrongful acts, intentional acts, they breach fiduciary duties, act bad in a big way. Make it simple. They could potentially open themselves up to personal liability, but if they act and maintain their fiduciary duties, which I have here, loyalty, care, good faith, fair dealing, meaning they don't try to double deal. They're trying to, they're on the board of the company, their obligation is to be loyal to the company, but yet an interesting deal comes along and says, well, maybe I'll do this deal on the side for myself. That's a breach of loyalty. You can get sued for that. Okay? So if you stay in the box, you're good. Who is the client, in essence, of your client? Who do you owe those duties to? If you're in a corporation, you owe the duty, if you're on the board, you owe it to the shareholders, you owe it to the corporation as a whole. And sometimes that gets a little tricky because you may have divided loyalties among the shareholders. One group feels one way, one group feels the other way. Your job as a board member, an officer, is what's best for the company. And you get a lot of protection under the U.S. laws if you're fully informed and use good judgment, good business judgment. It's called the business judgment rule. You will not get sued as long as you maintain that. If a company, this is a difference between the U.S. and Europe in many respects. If a company is solvent, you don't own any duties to your creditors. As the company shifts towards insolvency, the duty to the creditors also comes in. So if you're on the verge of bankruptcy, who are you working for? The banks and the other creditors are as important in your fiduciary duty considerations as the corporation as a whole. Again, you don't have personal liability for trading insolvent as long as you maintain your fiduciary duties. In other countries, if you're trading in an insolvent entity, board members have personal liability. That's not the case here. Just quickly, you can have different classes of stock, different member interests. That's what I talked about before. Different things. I'm going to quickly go through employment issues. It's really important. This entity, once it's set up, is going to start hiring people, right, to work. New York and most other states are employment at will. You can fire somebody because today is Friday and it's cold and I'm grumpy and I just, you're out, okay? I can't fire you for a discriminatory purpose. I can't fire you based on age, gender, so forth. So if that's the case, do you need a contract with people? Yes, you need an employment contract because without it, you can't build in certain other protections like duty of confidentiality, ability to restrict them from soliciting customers and other employees if they leave and go elsewhere, and potentially the ability to restrict them from taking a job with a competitor. And I'll tell you, and this is, foreign companies don't appreciate this sometimes, even though you draft a contract that has a non-compete provision that says, you work in my clothing company, we make performance apparel, you can't go to any competitor, many judges will not adhere to or respect or enforce that provision. They will reduce it down or eliminate it completely. And the reason is, there's an overriding public policy in the U.S. to allow people to work, particularly in their field. So the judge will try very hard to allow that person to go work and not hurt the company at the same time, but if it comes down between two equals, the judge is going to favor the employee every time. So why would you have it in your contract? You have it because it definitely makes the employee think twice about going to a competitor, and it certainly makes the competitor think twice about hiring that employee, particularly a senior employee, because if the competitor's smart, they're going to say to a prospective hire, let me see your employment contract from your old employer. And if there's a non-compete provision in there, that many times will stop that new employer from bringing on the employee, because they're going to be party to the lawsuit also. So non-competes are important. The last thing I'll touch on is work for hire. Anything an employee does for a company, even if they're on the payroll, if they develop software, they develop a design, they develop any kind of intellectual property, our intellectual property laws say that invention belongs to the creator, to the employee, even though they're on the payroll. And employers don't understand. I paid you, this is your job was to create the software. What do you mean I don't own it? No, you don't. So you need to have in the employment contract a provision for work for hire and assignment of any inventions so that it's very clear that that employee has given away its rights to any of those intellectual property creations. And I have another minute or I'm done.